Okay, in this lesson, we are now finding angles instead of sides using our trig ratios. So we're using our same SOHCAHTOA sine, cosine, tangent relationships, but we're interested in finding the angle. Okay, so let's say in this case, I knew how tall the building was and I knew how far I was away from it, but I don't know the angle at which I'm tilting my head, right? So I would still use, in this case, we have, again, opposite and adjacent. So I would still use tangent theta equals x over y, opposite over adjacent. But here we're trying to solve for theta, okay? So the steps are very, very similar. I set up a ratio, and then I do a little bit of algebra to solve them. Obviously, figuring out what that angle is the new step. So let's look at an example here. Okay, so here's what the delta math problems look like. And notice now, in the previous lesson we had x's on the legs of the triangle. Here my x is the angle. Okay, so take a second, think about which ratio we're going to use now. And you should have said cosine in this case. Because we are given from x, we have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. Okay, so here I build my equation. Cosine of x equals 61 over 86. So that's the adjacent side and the hypotenuse on the bottom. Okay, so notice what I have here is a fraction on one side, and here I have cosine of x. Okay, we're going to do the same thing that we always do to solve for a variable. We're going to isolate it using inverse operations, and it's going to look a little weird just because these operations are new. The opposite of cosine I write down like this: cosine to the -1. You read this as cosine inverse. I'm going to do that to both sides. Okay, so whatever I do to one side, I do to the other to maintain my equality. And cosine inverse and cosine are opposites. So I already told you, you'd probably guess that those cancel out. X is just left over. And on the right, I have cosine inverse of 61 over 86. You're like, what in the world is that? Here, again, is where you have to turn to a calculator to figure this out. Okay, so I'm going to use the delta math calculator. Although you can also do this on your TI 86, 84, whatever you got. So I'm going to hit cosine inverse, so there's a button for that. And then I'm just going to type in my fraction. And what was it again? 61 over 86. You could divide that out and get a decimal right away, but you don't need to. And then I get 44.8, and it says to the nearest degree. So to the nearest degree would be 45 degrees. Okay. So in this case, if this was like my building over here, BC, my head would be tilted at a 45-degree angle. Okay, we'll do a couple more examples. This I think should feel easy to you if you made it here through the last lesson. Because again, the hard part is setting it up, and then it's just a little bit of algebra calculator work. Make sure you capture this in example in your notes though before you move on. Okay, here we have triangle stew again. And we want the measure of t. T is up here to the nearest tenth of a degree. Okay, so take a second again, think SOHCAHTOA, and figure out which trig ratio we're going to use. You should have said tangent, so we're going to use tangent of x because we have opposite and adjacent, but no hypotenuse, right? So opposite side is 5.9 over adjacent side is 2.6, and then I'm going to take the tangent inverse of both sides. You'll probably not develop the habit of writing this, and that's okay. And again, on the left we have inverse operations that cancel out. On the right, we're just left with tangent inverse of 5.9 over 2.6. And that is a type it into your calculator type of problem. Okay, So here we want to the nearest tenth of a degree, which is 1 decimal point. So I get 66.2 degrees. Okay. Last question. We have triangle NAP. We're trying to find x, or the measure of angle O. So here you could probably guess, because we haven't done one yet, this is a sine problem. So we're going to use sine of x, because SOHCAHTOA, we have the opposite angle in the hypotenuse. Okay. And what that gets us is 62 over 88 is opposite over hypotenuse. And then we're going to sine inverse of both sides. And you don't have to rewrite it like I have been doing. I was just doing that to show you that we're doing operations. But you can just write it like this, kind of move the sine over to the other side. So sine of x equals 62 over 88. That means x is equal to the sine inverse of 62 over 88. Okay, so that's a fine way to show your work. And then again, you type that into your calculator. We went to the nearest degree this time. So I get like 44.7 something. I'm going to round that to 45 degrees. So now you not only know how to find a missing side of a triangle using trig, you now know how to solve for angles as well.